excited to welcome you to our first research seminar of the winter term of 2025. Before we begin, I want to give the land acknowledgement. We're here today on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Hiawatha, Dakota, Lakota, Dakota, and the Métis peoples. We are privileged to be here in terms of learning about education, sharing knowledge, and privileged to be on this land in order to do this. Today, what we're going to have is Dr. Tristan Hopper is going to talk about some of his research that he's done with youth who are experiencing homelessness and their connection with a mobile recreation plan. He'll have about 45 minutes for his presentation, and then we'll have time at the end if anyone has any questions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hopper for the presentation.
Great. Can everyone hear me okay with my microphone? Okay, good. Okay, thanks everyone for spending part of your Friday afternoon with me. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones too. So as Dr. Haber mentioned, my name is Dr. Tristan Hopper, and I'm Associate Professor here in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Studies. And I teach across our faculty. I see maybe one former Kin 120 student and then a couple current Kin 120 students. And so I teach Introduction to Recreation for People with Disabilities, and then I teach in our TR, Therapeutic Recreation program too. So for those of you who are in that program, I'll see you when you get into some of those classes. So what I thought I would do today is tell you a little bit about a program I was involved in co-creating called Rec on Wheels. And I'm a community-based researcher, and what that means is that I do most of my research with and alongside community. And so it's important to me that the people that I work with in our communities have an active role in having a say in the types of research that's being done within their community. And so if you want to think of it very simply, I do research with people, not on people or for people. Okay, and so my plan today is to talk a little bit about what youth homelessness looks like in Canada, a little bit about Rec on Wheels, and then some of the research that we did as a part of the program, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. All right, and so I do want to acknowledge the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. That was one of the gracious funders for the research portion of this project. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the programmatic or sort of infrastructure related funding that we received to develop the program, but for the sake of the research part, I wanted to acknowledge SSHRC. And then I failed to mention my research colleagues, but this was a collaboration between myself here at the U of R, some faculty members at the University of Toronto, Brock University, University of Alberta, and of course lots of graduate students and undergraduate students. All right, so I wanted to start with a story. I often start with a little bit of a story, and I think it maybe can help contextualize a little bit about how I think about this work. And what I will say is sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the things that I talk about can be triggering or upsetting for people. And so if you feel the need to take a couple minutes to leave, you won't be disruptive. So if you feel like something I've talked about may be upsetting you or triggering you, please feel free to do whatever you need to do to take really good care of yourself. So as we engage in our discussion today, I'm immediately reminded of the stories that I've heard from youth experiencing homelessness that I've come alongside in my ongoing research projects. For many of them, adults coming and going in their lives, helping, supporting, and of course hindering along the way. It matters to me how I engage in my research. Alyssa was a young person that I came to know during my time in Edmonton. She attended the program I was involved with regularly. We even stumbled our way through a Zumba class together. Alyssa shared with me that her earliest recollection of living without a home was at the age of 9 years old and being on the streets at 13 years old. And she once said to me, "You know, not many people know what it's like to spend all night on the street and not one single person cares where you are." She was right. I have no idea what that's like to spend the night on the street, never mind at the age of 13 years old. And so I think about and reflect on these profound lived experiences of precariously housed young people and think about how, as a researcher and as a teacher, I can attend to these in some way through my scholarship and, of course, my research programming and activism. A question I'll pose to you now, and I will pose it to you again later, is what role does the field of recreation and leisure studies play in addressing youth homelessness? Alyssa had fond memories of participating in recreation and leisure activities with her birth parents. They went on day trips. She played recreational soccer in her home community, yet never felt comfortable included in community spaces with her current lived experiences. Okay. So I'm going to try really hard to use the terminology youth experiencing homelessness, and partly because the experiences of young people who live without a home varies, very different across the spectrum. And so we often think of people who might be living without a home as those who are sleeping rough or are sleeping on the streets. But for young people, or youth who are typically aged between 13 and 24, houselessness or homelessness looks a little bit different. It could be that they're couch surfing on a friend's or an aunt's couch or a grandparent's couch, and they have until the end of the month to get out. And then after that, they don't know where they're going to go. They could be sleeping in their car or someone else's car. They could be sleeping in an emergency youth shelter. And so this idea of experiencing homelessness is reflective of some of those differing experiences that young people may have when it comes to living without a home. Technically speaking, though, youth homelessness is defined as a complex social issue where young people between the ages of 13 to 24, and I know that probably seems quite old, but that's actually the age range that a lot of government, sort of provincial and federal government policies use in defining youth. And so for many of these young people, they're living independently of parents and or caregivers and don't necessarily have the means or ability to acquire stable, safe, or consistent housing. Okay, and so for a lot of these young people who may fall within, Indigenous youth who may identify as the 2S LGBTQ community, youth who have had child and family services involvement, they are disproportionately impacted by houselessness and homelessness, and that's partly because 51% of that, sort of group of 13 to 24-year-olds within Canada who live without a home report interpersonal reasons for not having a place to live. So, domestic violence, substance abuse at home, intergenerational trauma, poverty, food scarcity, those types of things. And some data just actually came out from last year from our youth homelessness data in Canada in 2024, and 24% of all Canadians who experience homelessness on a daily basis, 24% of those, so almost a quarter of those people are youth, are between the ages of 13 to 24. And so they are the fastest growing body or population of people who are living without a home within our country. And it's hard to sort of know exactly how many youth on a daily basis are living without a home, but it's probably about 40,000 per year, and about 6,000 to 7,000 youth each night don't have a safe or stable place to live. Okay, and this data can be skewed in many ways because the way that they count or account for people experiencing homelessness is what they call point-in-time counts. Has anyone ever heard of a point-in-time count before? No? Well, it basically just means that people go out with clipboards and they go out and walk around the streets or go to shelters and say, do you have a place to live? And if the person says yes or no, that's sort of how they determine whether or not the person is homeless or not. And so there are many people who are missed or who are, living in someone's house right now, but they have to get out at the end of the month and they're not necessarily counted. And so I would wager a guess that this 24% is actually much higher than initially reported. And so many young people who are experiencing homelessness or are unstably housed experience what we refer to as social exclusion. And so that means that almost in all walks of their life, either fully or partially, they don't feel like that they belong or that they're told that they don't belong. And so, having any type of meaningful social, economic, political, or cultural institutions that they can attend and be a part of are far and few between. And so if you can imagine, feeling like you don't necessarily have a place that you can go to feel safe or comfortable, or a place that you have friends, that can have huge detrimental effects on your overall health and well-being, of course. And of course, we know that youth experiencing homelessness face health challenges that impact their ability to get paid employment, to go to school, and to ultimately find a safe place to live. All youth, including those who are experiencing homelessness, should be provided the opportunity to participate in meaningful activities such as sports, arts, recreational activities, volunteering, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that's important in a minute and how we came to develop what we called Rec on Wheels as a way to sort of fill a necessary service gap within there. But for many of these young people, recreational time is a scarce commodity. They spend most of their days for mere survival, finding places to stay warm when it's cold in the winter, of course, trying to find places to live and to work, to attend to their school matters. So when we think about squeezing in time for enjoyment and meaningful activity, for a lot of young people who experience homelessness, it's not even necessarily on their radar. Yet we know the benefits of things like physical activity and recreational sport. Okay. And so as a part of that data that I just reported on, about that 24% of young people who experience homelessness, some contextual sort of numbers for you, if you will, around the health impacts of young people experiencing homelessness. You'll see sort of a legend here up at the top, and I will admit I'm not a numbers person. This is as complicated as I get when it comes to statistical sort of reporting, but you'll see, I'll draw your attention actually over to the sort of far right-hand side of the graph, where we see that 67% and 56% of young people, that sort of 24% of youth between the ages of 13 to 24, report having a mental health issue or have experienced some type of mental health crisis over the last year. And 56% of them also have a substance use issue or use substances as a way to cope. And for many of these young people, and I know from experience and from working with them for many years, their substance use often stems from self-medicating because they have a mental health issue and because they've been sort of pushed away from traditional healthcare services. Emergency rooms are often the places that young people go to get sort of their primary health care, and to wait for 12, 13 hours to get care can be difficult, especially when you've got other things that you're worrying about. And also for many of them, they use substances to stay awake at night. If they don't have a safe place to live, they use the substances as a way to be safe and so that they're not the victims of any type of crime of opportunity, if you will, in the evenings if they're sleeping rough and don't have a safe place to live. Okay, so for a lot of them, this substance use, although that number is quite high, it can be out of necessity for many of them, or at least self-reported in that way. So as well as addressing young people who experience homelessness immediate needs, so things like, of course, finding a safe place to live, going to school, having access to food, those types of things, we know that from previous literature and research that recreation is essential to supporting youth in reestablishing or adopting new behaviors, reconnecting them with new or existing friends, and can give them skills and coping mechanisms to deal with complicated and difficult situations. So if I can give you a bit of an example, one of the young people that participated in our Rec on Wheels program was had a difficulty with a landlord as a part of our time during the program, and they found that by the end of their participation, they felt like they had better coping skills because a lot of the activities we did were team-based, so they got to practice and try out, cooperation and those types of things that they weren't getting access to before our Rec on Wheels program. So, we often think of these soft skills or these benefits that we get from participating in recreation as we're not necessarily aware of them until we need to use them. And so for these young people in particular, when those opportunities are not available to them, and then all of a sudden they start having access to them again, they start realizing their potential and their ability to benefit or to thrive in other parts of their life too. However, so we know that recreation is essential. Each of you probably have some type of recreation, leisure, sport activity that you like to do to de-stress or to connect with friends or for whatever reason you do it for. But for a lot of these young people, again, they face that social exclusion. They don't have a place that they can participate or where that they belong. So for many of them, they try and get access to drop-in programs at the YMCA or city recreation programs, but they don't necessarily have clean indoor shoes, access to equipment that they need to participate. So then they're told that they need to leave. So it's sort of this like cycle of exclusion that a lot of these young people experience. In addition to things like registration costs and those types of things. And so we know recreation, physical activity is essential for young people, especially young people who are experiencing homelessness. Yet there are an incredible amount of barriers, both real and perceived barriers that these young people face when trying to get access to programming. And so, thus this idea of Rec on Wheels. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Rec on Wheels from here on out and what we did. But Rec on Wheels was essentially, this idea came to a colleague of mine, Krista Costa Bradstreet, that's in Ontario, who works for the Canadian Parks and Rec Association. And, I bumped my usher mic here. And we thought, because these young people face an incredible amount of barriers to getting access to what we might refer to as mainstream recreation programming, we thought, why don't we get a van? This wasn't our van. This is sort of a mock-up of what we hoped it would look like at some point down the road, and I'll tell you what happened with the program when we get to that point. But why don't we take the recreation stuff to the young people? Why don't we meet them where they're at? And so we created a relationship with some shelters, some youth emergency shelters in the Greater Toronto area. And in order to address a lot of these barriers, things like geographical limitations in travel, not having access to public transit, costs, equipment, lack of food or food scarcity, fear and shame, all of the things that they were experiencing in previous attempts of recreation programming. Let's eliminate those barriers. Let's take this Rec on Wheels van, let's take this program to them and allow them to participate. And so that's sort of how Rec on Wheels started. So we initially received a $75,000 Trillium Foundation grant to implement a feasibility study. And we essentially did that to say, has this been done before? Who's done this? Who's done it well? Does this type of model work for young people who are experiencing homelessness? I mean, it seems simple to just rent a van and to fill it full of recreational activities and just drive to shelters and open the doors. But it was important to us, again, to make sure that what we were doing was meaningful to the community that we were entering, of which neither of us had any similarities or shared lived experience. All right, so we, as a part of this feasibility study, we did a couple pilot programs at 4 shelters where we just went and said, of course we had existing relationships with the shelters already, but we just set up shop, open the doors of the van and let the youth come in and participate. We had things like art equipment, musical instruments, sports equipment, pickleball, sort of like things, basketballs, that kind of stuff. And if you can imagine, a lot of youth emergency shelters in particular don't have recreation spaces. They don't have large rooms like this or gymnasiums. They have perhaps small multi-purpose rooms that double as a place where people might get counseling services or eat their lunch, or maybe they do a drop-in art program here and there. And so having access to any type of meaningful activity at emergency shelters is incredibly difficult. And so that's our idea for Rec on Wheels. And so over the course of the duration of Rec on Wheels, here's just some outputs of the program that we were able to achieve as a part of our work. This is sort of our earlier days with someone's like old toy. These are Megan and Trevor were our Rec on Wheels facilitators. They were summer students in Ontario that helped deliver the program, and then eventually we worked our way up to a Sprinter van here on the right-hand side. You can't really see it, but we started small with just someone's old van that we were borrowing, and I wanted to point your attention to a couple key sort of statistics over here. So we had 8 shelter programs, which was quite substantial, and so there's only 7 days in a week, which meant that we were doubling up shelters on some days. So Megan and Trevor made sure that, or the van crew made sure that they were at the same shelter on the same day at the same time every week. That really was important to the young people. We learned that through our feasibility studies and some of our earlier conversations with the youth when we were getting feedback on the design of the program. And whether one person showed up or whether 20 people showed up, it didn't matter. Megan and Trevor were there. Megan and Trevor were there with the van, had things out for people to do, and that was important. So over the course of the program, they made 78 total visits, 338 total participants, and of those 338 participants, 195 of them were repeat participants, which tells me that Megan and Trevor were doing something right in terms of offering programming for the young people. All right. And so we did things, both structured and structured activity. They got into quite a competitive series of board games where the board game would stay set up at the shelter over the week, and Megan and Trevor would pick things up the next week that they were there. Lots of basketball outside in the warmer months. Of course, in Canada, we're bound to sort of seasonal weather changes. When it got colder, they had to make their way inside and sort of made use of whatever space the shelters had. Again, Megan and Trevor were there no matter what the weather was and how many kids showed up or not. One of the shelters that the young people participated in was a family shelter. So at that family shelter, they delivered parent and kid programming too. And so when we got into the research side of the program, so as Rec on Wheels was sort of unraveling and Megan and Trevor were visiting these shelters, it became apparent to us that it was important we did some type of research with the young people that we were working with and with the shelter staff that we had partnered with, mostly because we felt like things were going pretty well and that it was important to share this with the broader community, both public and academic audiences, okay? And so some of the questions that we asked ourselves are things like, what counts as knowledge? And so what types of things, as researchers who didn't share experience with the young people in the shelters, we wanted to make sure that we sort of valued their stories and created a space that they felt comfortable in sharing those experiences and sharing those stories. And so we really wanted to be attentive to that. We also asked our things like, what is good research? We're working with young people between the ages of 13 to 24. It's much different than, sitting down with an adult and asking questions about their experiences in a recreation program. We needed to think a little bit differently about how we were going to be accountable and respectful with our stories or with our work with these young people. For a lot of the youth that we worked with, having relationships with adults in particular, and especially those who were viewed to be in authoritative positions, so things like, coaches or shelter staff or researchers or Megan and Trevor who were the van staff, it really was important that we created meaningful relationships with the young people that we were going to engage with in this research program. We didn't want to, ruin or hinder any type of trust or relationship that we had already built. And so this research project and some of the data that I'm going to share with you here in a minute came much later on in the Rec on Wheels program because we spent so much time just sort of hanging out and playing board games and being there on the same day of the week, each week with a van full of different things for people to do. And lastly, then, we really wanted to make sure that we were upholding mutuality and reciprocity. We wanted to make sure that the youth in particular had a say in the design of the research project, that they got to do some of the research stuff with us, and that they got to give their feedback on the Rec on Wheels program as a part of that participation. It was a program that we were offering for them and with them. We wanted to make sure that we weren't doing this adult sort of top-led design, which they were so used to on a daily basis. And so what we did was we came up with this youth-led participatory action research design, or YPAR, if you will, which is a community-based participatory research method, which, if you can think of traditional research methods or traditional research design, it's typically designed and delivered by the researcher on the participant, whereas this one, the youth played an active role in helping us design this portion of the research project. We asked them the types of things that they wanted to do to collect data or to generate data as a part of their participation in Rec on Wheels. We wanted to make sure that they had a say in what the data or what their stories looked like at the end of the day. We invited them to have conversations with the shelter staff about the shelter staff's perception of Rec on Wheels. So we were really committed to trying to involve the youth the best that we could in all aspects of the research project and the design when we got to that point. Of course, for many of them, for some of them, they were interested in being involved in all kinds of things. Some of them were interested in not being involved in any kinds of things. They just wanted to participate in Rec on Wheels. But a couple of them in particular were really interested in this idea of research. No one had ever asked them before, what types of things would you ask your shelter staff or shelter attendant if you had a chance about Rec on Wheels? Like, to be given that power and to be given that autonomy to ask questions of people who typically are viewed as authoritative or decision makers in their lives was quite a powerful experience for them. And it built on the Rec on Wheels program success. In addition to some of those sort of earlier questions that we were talking... I knew I was going to do that at some point. In addition to asking ourselves those reflective questions about what counts as knowledge, whose knowledge is it, those kinds of things, we built our YPAR approach, or YPAR research design, on things like mutual respect, relationship building, so we maintained those relationships with the youth. Again, we showed up at the same time on the same day, made sure that they knew when we were going to be there, those kinds of things. This idea of power sharing, allowing them to ask questions of us and allowing them to ask questions of the shelter staff, that idea of giving some of the power that researchers or adults hold back to the youth. Allowing them to develop some skills related to research, interviewing, research design, research analysis or data analysis, and allowing them to build some capacity. And then, of course, thinking about ways that we can work together to address the injustices that they were faced with as youth experiencing homelessness. So in addition to all of the other things that the youth were working on as a part of this YPAR approach and project, which was a multi-year sort of staggered unraveling of a research program, the youth decided that they wanted us, the researchers, to ask them their experiences. And so I'm going to share some of that data here in a minute. And as a part of that, we also decided that we were going to hold an interview with the shelter staff too, to get their perception of Rec on Wheels, which I'm also going to share here in a minute. And so we conducted several interviews with the youth participants, primarily the ones that were involved in the youth-led portions of the project, but also ones who weren't. It was important to us to speak to the youth that, wanted to be involved in Rec on Wheels but didn't want to be involved in the research project, about their experiences in the program, especially the ones that came back on a regular basis. There was something that was important to them about Rec on Wheels, and we needed to make sure that we gave them the platform to share those experiences. And although the shelter staff were not super present during the Rec on Wheels, they of course sort of just opened their doors and allowed us to be there to offer this program. We felt that it's necessary to have some experiences, or to get their experiences about the program too, and the necessary gap that perhaps Rec on Wheels filled in their sort of their work and their practice, but also in the lives of the young people. And so when it came to speaking to the staff in particular, experiences of those staff ranged from being a director of services, a program coordinator, and of the shelter staff participants that participated, only one of them was involved with or in charge of recreation programming for youth. And so that speaks to how recreation, although the shelter staff all acknowledged its importance and they knew that the youth sought opportunities to engage in meaningful activity, they just did not have the capacity to offer structured or meaningful activity on a regular basis to the youth because they were so busy trying to fulfill those other necessary needs of the young people. And so only one of the 7 participants actually focused on providing recreation opportunities for the youth. And so when we sat down with the youth in particular over several conversations, it was very clear to us that Rec on Wheels was important to them. They had been looking for and seeking opportunities to participate in both new activities, so whether it's pickleball or anything else, but also re-engaging in activities that they had been participating in perhaps before their housing experiences changed. Okay, so things like basketball or soccer, and so providing them the opportunity to engage in that was quite profound and extremely important to them. In addition to that, for a lot of the young people, they felt like they didn't necessarily have an opportunity to chat with their other the other residents of the shelter. They maybe saw each other at meals or whatever, but to have the opportunity to connect and to play and to engage in activity together was important to these young people. They wanted an opportunity to rekindle or to create new relationships with young people that they also lived with. For some people, it was a distraction from all of the things that were going on in their lives. For many of the young people, their childhoods were taken. They felt like their childhoods were taken from them when they became homeless. They lost connection to friends at school. They lost opportunities to participate in meaningful activity. And so to have that distraction away from, making sure that they had a safe place to live and where are they going to work, and I only have a few more nights here and then I have to go somewhere else. To have that sort of moment of reprieve and distraction from all of those stressors in their life was very important to them. And then the quote for this presentation comes from this particular young girl who said that she felt like a kid again, and that not in a weird way, but she felt like that little girl inside her was able to come back out, and she sort of reimagined herself or imagined herself in places that were happier for her. And so overall, Rec on Wheels was quite impactful on these young people's lives. And so in addition then to, as I mentioned, talking to the young people, we also talked to the shelter staff. And so when we think about research on programs or in particular recreation programs and youth-focused programs, we often fail to speak to the people who are responsible for the program or responsible for the facility. And so we really wanted to make sure that we got that diverse perspective and that we talked to the shelter staff who spent, a large chunk of their time supporting these young people in their daily lives about how they felt Rec on Wheels was going and why they felt like it may or may not was important to their shelter sort of operations and to the youth's lives. And so for a lot of people who work in the houselessness or the homelessness sector, recreation is commonly done off the side of their desk. That's evident in the types of jobs, responsibilities, and titles that I shared with you on a couple of previous slides. Only one of the 7 participants actually worked in recreation. Everyone else sort of like picks up a deck of cards and plays cards when they have a spare minute. Otherwise, the young people are sort of left to fend for themselves in finding access to and participation in meaningful activity. And so we wanted to make sure that we spent time talking to the shelter staff. And so this is a lot of text, and if you're curious, there's an article that we published on the data from our conversations with the shelter staff. But all in all, and I think most profound, is that in addition to promoting active youth participation in the daily sort of happenings of the shelter and getting them participating in activity that was important to them, it allowed the young people, the shelter staff felt like it allowed the young people to have a break from all of the responsibilities that they were faced with on a daily basis. They were allowed to just relax and to play and to experience some joy and the things that, all of the things that we seek when we are participating in activity that's important to us. And lastly, it really did fill a necessary gap in supportive programming. The shelter staff felt like they were doing their best with fulfilling the, sort of the necessities of the young people, connecting them to work and counseling services, but recreation, meaningful activity was really something they did off the side of their desks. They didn't have time to do it. They knew that it was important, or they know that it's important to the youth and that it has overall health benefits, but they just did not feel like they had the capacity to do everything, except, of course, the recreation programmer whose job it was to do that. But for the majority of the shelter staff participants, that was just not something they felt like they had the capacity to do. So Rec on Wheels was impactful in fulfilling that gap in the supportive programming. And so, unfortunately, after the end of at the end of our sort of like 5 or 6 month workings of Rec on Wheels, the organization that was responsible for housing Rec on Wheels, if you will, decided that it no longer fit within their mandate, and so Rec on Wheels ceases to exist to this point, unfortunately, but on conclusion of the program, we tried really hard to make sure that the young people that were coming on a regular basis had connection to and access to programming within their communities that they could continue engaging in, and that they were well set up for that. And so some key contributions then that overall that this research makes, both to the scholarly literature, but also to the youth homelessness sector. Practically speaking, recreation activity plays an important role in the lives of youth experiencing homelessness and should be a priority of supportive housing programming and, of course, municipal recreation programming too. And I'll talk in conclusion here in a couple minutes about where we're at with doing some work around getting the City of Regina on board with some of this access and inclusion work. Recreation programming does fill a necessary service gap within regular shelter programming. Again, Rec on Wheels was impactful, it was important, it was meaningful, and the shelter staff acknowledged that that was something that they weren't able to fulfill on a daily basis. I think we need to continue to inquire into diverse perspectives when exploring overall impact of programs. We often talk to participants, that's important, but I think we also need to be talking to the people who are facilitating the program or are in charge of overseeing the running of the program too. And further research is needed to explore recreation in the lives of youth experiencing homelessness, which is sort of ties in nicely to my last slide here. And so, given the benefits of recreation programming on the lives of youth, and especially the youth experiencing homelessness, and all of the barriers that they face to getting access to programming, although Rec on Wheels was a really fun program and project to be involved with, it was a bit of a sort of a temporary solution to a larger systemic issue, and that's getting access for equity deserving young people to mainstream programming, or City of Regina Leisure Guide programming that they're trying to access and want to have access to. And so I'm currently engaged in a multi-year project alongside the City of Regina to enhance these experiences and to enhance the programming opportunities for your equity-deserving youth, and with a focus on youth experiencing homelessness, because what we also learned through Rec on Wheels is that youth wanted to participate in programming in their community. They wanted to be out of the shelter. They wanted to be with friends from school that didn't live in the shelter. And so finding ways to support that and to remove barriers is important. Thanks.